We are seizing this land with a vision, exposing the PSC's shams. So let's sing of our happy condition, surrounded by acres of clams. Surrounded by acres of clams, my friends, surrounded by acres of clams. So let's sing of our happy condition, surrounded by acres of clams.
Welcome, Nelia Sargent, Paul Gunter, to Moccasin Tracks. It's an honor to have you both here.
Welcome.
Thank you for joining us. We told our listeners this morning that both Paul and Nelia were part of the Clamshell Alliance. And if you would each tell us a little bit about your thoughts about Clamshell and where we're moving today to use some of those skills that were learned by participating with Clamshell Alliance and what you're involved in. Just each of you want to maybe a little more intro. Thank you. Paul, you want to start?
Certainly. Well, thank you, Debbie, and it's really an honor to be on the program. I think, right now I'm working at a group called Beyond Nuclear, and I come here by a whole stepping stones that began with my involvement with the Clamshell Alliance back in starting in 1975 and direct action through nonviolent civil disobedience, public education, a whole self-awareness as well as social awareness, as well as global awareness of the whole idea how we come by our energy these days. And it's been a long road. I frankly think I'm going to have to reincarnate to continue this work because of, one central issue about nuclear power is the legacy of nuclear waste, which, was one of the prime reasons that I got involved to protest the licensing of the Seabrook nuclear power plant on the New Hampshire seacoast in a very sensitive saltwater estuary where they're going to dig up an Indian burial ground to generate nuclear waste, and with the byproduct being nuclear power, nuclear electricity. But the legacy that will go on forever is the nuclear waste issue, which has to this day now, still unresolved on where they're going to bury this. And if burial is even relevant about something as toxic as radioactive nuclear waste. And, Debbie and I are quite familiar with the fight to stop nuclear waste being buried in New Hampshire in the granite there. We were active in 1985 through 87, where the choice of the U.S. government was to go into the granite state, and as well as a number of other sites around the country, to explore the idea of taking land by eminent domain under these Yankee towns centered in Hillsborough, New Hampshire, to bury 70,000 metric tons of irradiated nuclear fuel for future generations to deal with. So, that's just one aspect that got me involved in Clamshell, but, nuclear weapons is another one. Nuclear accidents is another one. And all these are still part of the picture today, as we're now talking about expanding nuclear power around the world, as all these issues are still being forgotten, deliberately covered up, and papered over. And the paper chase needs to be confronted by people power. And that's where we're at today.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Paul. I wanted Nelia. You're looking good, Nelia. You're all centered, and I hope that your sound
is my sound on?
Your sound is on. Yeah, we hear you. Great.
Oh, hallelujah. Okay, great. Thank you.
We talked a little bit about principled, nonviolent, direct action strategy, but it's also a way of life. But the strategy was part of the Clamshell Alliance. The nonviolent direct action was a specific, principled. People were trained by affinity groups. Can you talk a little bit about what that was like for you? And also, you're a nonviolence trainer. Talk a little bit about yourself and how you got into it.
Oh, thank you. First of all, it's such an honor to be sharing this with each of you, the reverence that I hold for the way that each of you uplifted and honored the native voice. Seabrook was a sacred burial mound of the Pennacook, I believe, and the way that you honored that still, small, quiet voice of the native drum, the heartbeat of Mother Earth that was with us from the very beginning. I really still, it gives me chills today, thinking of each of you and the way you've walked the talk and lived your life with such integrity, and the teachings that has been for me. The native voice was a very powerful beginning of our movement for me, and I think was a key part of the inspiration. I am a third generation pacifist. I don't preach pacifism, but I do believe that there is that of the divine within every individual. And I seek to address that within every person I meet and address. Excuse me. Regardless of their role, if they're wearing a blue uniform, or if they're a colleague with me, or if they're a provocateur, I'm seeking to address that humanity within each and every individual. And for me, all of this begins with each of us finding what it is within each of us. There's no right or wrong answers. What is it that each of us, what are the core values that each of us believe that we wish to uphold and live? That there's no right or wrong answers here, and it's different for each one of us. But when we disengage from the toxic anti-social media, when we connect with nature, when we connect with our hearts, and when we follow our heart, as the native voice taught me, how do I honor that? And what is it that leads me? What do I feel called? And each of this begins with that still small inner voice within each and every one of us. Teenagers know non-cooperation. This is something every single one of us learned growing up. These are tools that we all have access to. And it's important to connect with each of us with our own histories and herstories, whatever that may be. The people's history of the United States is a very diverse history. And when we can each find what it is that's within our own legacy that we wish to uphold after connecting with our own core values, there's just immense power that is liberated. The power of the people is a force to be reckoned with. As we proved in Seabrook, a non-issue became the center of the national debate in only 4 years. That's virtually unprecedented, according to Dr. Jean Sharp.
Yeah, amazing. Nelia, just one more aspect. We've talked about this before, nonviolence training and what each individual might experience with that. It's empowering.
It is. Absolutely. That empowerment is the core of what I seek to address within every training. It's each person finding that power within that every single one of us hold. I don't care who we are. We each hold immense power. I don't believe in apathy. I believe that people have been disconnected from their own personal power. People do care. It's just that we're so poisoned by the dominant anti-social media and the culture around us that we lose track of what that power is that we each and every one of us hold. And that's the whole purpose and point for me of an affinity group is, and nonviolent training is for each person to find that power within and to understand that we have enormous power to act. It starts with each individual, but then when we start to act collectively, who knows?
Yeah, yeah. Paul, I really was taken by some of your lighthearted remarks in Eric Wolf's documentary Acres of Clams. And it was such a great example of being on the front line and the engagement that you had with police officers. Could you just maybe share a little bit of that experience and what that was like for you?
Yeah. So, I look at I have to say that I look at nonviolence as it's complicated by the fact that part of me looks at it as polite insistence that we are honoring all life through these actions, and I think that it's an effort that goes heart to heart that our actions need to honor the both our opponent and our colleague and the life that surrounds us. That we want to be a voice in their defense. So I've recognized the nonviolent direct action also as a tactical way. There's that deeper heartfelt work that we're striving to connect our affinity with infinity, if that communicates. But there's also just the here and now and the practicality that when we find ourselves in conflict, that you want to diffuse that conflict. And, that's where I see nonviolence as a real tactical situation. So you want to reach out to your opponent rather than block them out.
Yes.
We have to resolve the here and now in order to honor the future.
Yes.
So, for example, when I first walked out onto the Seabrook site, which was at that time on August 1st, 1976, it was shredded trees and plowed ground. And we were looking to dedicate that land, rededicate that land to by bringing on sunflowers to plant and maple trees and corn to restore the site to nature and honor it. And we were confronted by the Seabrook Police Department, who were engaged in, upholding the law to honor the law of property ownership that's based on, our country's power enshrined in money, and that money trumps everything. And so that was the point of conflict, that there's, we need to be looking out for our future. And it was a simple conflict. He was there with his job to remove us, arrest us, and take us off. And it was our job to be steadfast in communicating what the real issues are that supersede the right to property. And so, I refused to get up when he said, "You're trespassing, and I'm going to take you out." And um, I laid down, and he and this other officer that was there to remove the 18 of us that were on that first action, they handcuffed us. And in my case, they did two sets of handcuffs on each wrist, and then they ran the billy club between the other open loops, and they, dragged me out. And the handcuffs cut. And when they would drop, um, they would drop me to rest up every once in a while. And one of my arresting officers leaned over me to look in my face and dropped his billy club into my mouth, as if, to just sort of persuade me that I should get up. And but what the outcome of it was, years later, um, after this officer retired, I did meet with him by happenstance. And I looked at him, and basically, it wasn't so much about forgiveness or anything like that. It was just, look, you had your job, I had my job, and here we are. And I said the same thing to Meldrum Thompson, the then governor of New Hampshire, who was insistent on building this nuclear waste generator. And I happened to run into him in a restaurant in Concord, New Hampshire, Charo's Grill. I remember it well. And he was with his two bodyguards. It was just a few days after we'd been arrested and roughed up and taken off to jail. And I walked over to him, and I saw him go into the restaurant. So I followed him in, and I said, I walked up to him and his bodyguards and says, "Look, Governor Thompson, this is really about your children and your children's children and your children's children. And that's why I got arrested." And he looked at me and he said, "Mr. Gunter, you have every right to be arrested." And it really was a clear message that we do have a right to make these choices. And I exercised mine, and he recognized it. He was still opposed, but he was right. It's we've got to. There are points in life where we have to raise conflict, and but at the same time we have to honor life, and in more cases we need to honor life that looks beyond our own and the other that we engage in. And that's where we're at today.
I would call it civil obedience, not disobedience. There are laws higher than the laws of mankind, and upholding the circles of life is crucial. We're at a crossroads in time again. We each have a choice. Will we be silently complicit with the forces of money, the power interests that will extinguish life uninterrupted? Or will we interpose our bodies with love, with compassion, knowing we could get hurt, we could get killed, but we can also transform this conflict away from the nuclear bomb into love?
I just wanted to add that if you put things in context, what is money compared to genocide? What is power compared to genocide, omnicide? And that's what we are dealing with. Ultimately, nuclear power is the flip side of a currency of uranium, that the other side is nuclear weapons. And we have to recognize that the spread of the peaceful atom ultimately leads us to nuclear war.
Mhm.
And that's the choice that we are making time and time and time again, is to which side are you on?
Yeah, yeah. Thank you for that. Um, Nelia, I just wanted to briefly ask you to if you would enlighten our listeners today about taking your work to your community and how you are working within your community, um, practicing all these values that you have in your life. And I'm thinking of how you volunteer at the homeless shelter to provide warmth for people who are homeless or houseless. Can you talk about maybe some other things that you do in your community using your skills?
I was just at the warming shelter in Claremont, New Hampshire this morning, actually, and was one of the founding people last year when we started this. Our county is the only one in New Hampshire that has no organized shelter system. And so volunteers started this last year, and we're continuing. Other things that I do, I'm involved with regenerative agricultural work. I'm supporting local producers. Some of them are conventional, and work with the USDA in conventional ways, but I'm also supporting those that are transitioning away from fossil fuel-based fertilizers and toxic poisons. I try to live simply so that others may simply live. I chose to give away all of my father's life insurance as I was going into blindness at age 20. I grew up fully sighted. And because of my nonviolent convictions that I was raised with in the nuclear disarmament movement as a child, and I turned 11 in Japan, I learned the lessons of Hiroshima and Nagasaki as a young child. I came out of that museum shaking like a leaf and trembling and crying. Visceral impact was really powerful on me. The connection with nuclear power and nuclear weapons is so visceral for me. I knew the men in Claremont who died. They literally saw their hands as they shielded their eyes sitting in the desert, US atomic veterans who were used as human guinea pigs in the early 50s. They died of cancer. They won their lawsuit and the families received pennies on the dollar in compensation. The lessons of Hiroshima and Nagasaki are very real for me. And radiation is a threat that knows no bounds. It knows no class, it knows no race, it knows no geographical boundaries. There's nowhere to run, there's nowhere to hide. And so I also choose to eat as low as I can on the food chain, partly for my own personal protection because poisons are concentrated as we move up the food chain. But so I choose no animal products at all. But it's also a respect for all life and to lower my carbon footprint to the max. The greatest single choice I believe we each have is what's on the end of our fork on a daily basis. And so I've tried to live simply so others may simply live. I live in a community of people who 50 years ago were committed to war tax refusal. We didn't want to work full time for peace and pay for war. And that meant if we were serious about it, we had to live below taxable levels of income, or we would have, penalties and so forth seized and end up paying double, which some of us ended up doing. But also, it's just easier to simplify. Living simply so others may simply live is easier said than done, and it's always an imperfect balancing act. I had to redefine what did security mean if I was going to give away all of this so-called security, my father's life insurance, as I was going into blindness. My father's death was a much bigger death than the death of my eyes at age 20, for me, emotionally. And I defined security as cooperative living ability and the movement circles that I had grown up in as really my ultimate security, community, cooperation. I don't do it perfectly. We're all flawed and imperfect, and yet that venture is ever so worthwhile for me and ever so gratifying and rewarding. And the circles of love, the circles of life continue.
what we see in Eric Wolf's documentary Acres of Clams is that love, is that kindness that people were showing each other, the circle dances, the all these little snippets of scenes of and Paul, was that something that influenced you? I know you were living in Marlow on a kind of a cooperative farm for some time, but how do you move through your community and the work that you do today?
Well, I did learn a lot of lessons along the way, and relearn. That's right now I am a homeowner now, and so and living in the suburbs of Washington D.C. So it's different in many senses, but um, Tacoma Park, Maryland is a very progressive community. So I do still retain that sense of broader sharing in a community. I find it settling and reassuring that Tacoma Park is a city that has by municipal law declared itself a nuclear-free zone, which made me feel at home and to come here. There is a municipal law that says that the city of Tacoma Park has to review all purchases by the city to see if those vendors or companies also do business in nuclear weapons development. And so the city has taken a position to embargo its business, city business, against nuclear weapons manufacture and nuclear weapons delivery systems. And we're still part in an effort as a suburb to Washington D.C. To be close to the seat of federal government as an example that people power can have an influence and can set an example, even as we live simply, as Nelia has emphasized, that we need to act collectively to influence the big picture of how the United States it still needs course correction. We're quite aware. I became quite aware of how our history is in conflict. Our history as a country, our history as a democracy, our history as governing, has always lived with contradiction, and that contradiction is borne out with the fact that the indigenous peoples of this country were not regarded by the Constitution of the Founding Fathers, and that that they practiced. Our founding fathers also practiced enslavement, another violation of our Constitution. And so, while our Constitution is a valuable document, we've got course corrections that continue to be a challenge. I've learned that broadening our community should entail sharing these lessons, and also very much so being part of are the fact that we need to forgive our country. We need to forgive our um, our history, but at the same time, make that challenge um, our priority to live up to our words and our thoughts in practice.
Mm-hmm. Mm.
I also
Hey,
work with the Albert Einstein Institution. Dr. Gene Sharp founded this organization to promote the strategic use, study, and use of applied nonviolent resistance in conflict around the globe. And right now, the Albert Einstein Institute, Gene died in 2018, but we are continuing on. We're expanding the board. And right now, we're developing a curriculum, a modular curriculum with a core basis of the fundamentals of nonviolent principles, and then multiple optional additional curriculum modules that can be applied in living rooms, that can be applied by church groups, that can be applied by resistance groups, anywhere that anyone has access to the internet or a cell phone around the world. We're testing this now on multiple continents. And getting interactive dynamic feedback. And we've set this up in a manner to be interactive and to be an ongoing dialogue and live curriculum that's responsive to the needs of
wow.
all over the world.
That sounds great. I'm really enthused to hear about each of your work. I wanted to make sure that I introduced you to my co-host, Rick,
Hello.
and Carol and Hunt,
Hi, thank
um,
you.
who co-hosts with me and help me produce radio every week. It's really fun to, do this work with them. They are Abenaki living here in New Hampshire. So we're of course going to follow up on the burials that were at Seabrook, see if we can find out more information about that. And as we wrap up this conversation today, and I apologize because I know we could talk more. I want to give you each just a couple minutes in closing, and I want to say that I'm very honored to have you both here today, and thank you so much.
Yes.
In closing, Nelia, what do you want our listeners to take away?
First, I would say to Caroline and Rick, aho, Wilwini. Thank you so much.
Yes.
All right.
Thank you.
Our listeners, to take away, to please to disengage from the chatter, the toxic anti-social media, and to really listen to your heart. Listen to your heart. Listen to nature, and find what it is within each of you. There's no right or wrong answers here. What is it that within each one of us motivates us? Find that voice within and follow your heart. This is the gift that Native people give me. And as dear Slow Turtle taught me, I pass on his medicine now to all the listeners. Please remember to include yourself in the circle of all those you care for.
Oh, beautiful. Thank you, Nelia. Paul, in closing, do you have any comments for our listeners?
I had the honor of meeting Grandfather David at the Hopi reservation in Hotevilla, Shungapave, and it really, was a reality check that that we need to look to the lessons of the original people here on this Turtle Island, and to recognize that we're all here together, and we need to make that sharing loving and honoring, and for those that are yet to come, to make this place of peace with all beings.
Thank you, Paul.
We
It's
are
really
all
been
one and all under the law of one.
it's just been so much fun to be here with you guys, and um, we're going to have Eric Wolf join us the 21st, and you know we'll hook him up with somebody else too, Nelia, because I know the practice is to have one woman and one man present. So we're trying to follow some Clamshell Alliance protocols and
Balancing.
and balancing. Yes, truly. So we're going to be continue to talk about this issue. I hope I can write to Kevin Camps, who works with you, Paul, and talk a little bit more about the nuclear waste. And because we have so much of it right here in New England, and so we'll try to use this show as an educational tool. And I want to thank you for being with us today to get us started.
Thank you.
No nukes.
All right, you take care, and I want to say goodbye before Zoom cuts us off. So, adios. Have a great day.
Continued.
Thank you both.
Until soon, yet never soon enough.
All right. Bye now.
Love you.
Love you too.